we have to define the boundaries, because you cannot be a free flowing animal anymore once the BPM is in place. And the human tendency all across the world is that they don't like boundaries.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process. Welcome to the next episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner, and today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Aayush Singhal. Now, Aayush is head of quality Southeast Asia for Schaeffler. He has also got a vast experience, a diverse experience over the past decade or so, working in various roles in manufacturing, all surrounding this idea of process management. How do we manage the work that we are doing to get better results, essentially? So really excited for this conversation. Aayush has worked in Japan, UK, India, Singapore, so throughout many different regions as well. So has that experience there that we're able to glean from. So if you're listening to this, please get out your notepads and pens. You're going to learn a lot from Aayush. Aayush, I'm excited to have this conversation. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Daniel, for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be a part of your show. Thanks a lot.
So one question that my audience has for you is, how did you get started in the world of process? Is it something that you stumbled into? Is it something that you were formally educated in? Where was the beginning of process for you?
Well, Daniel, I think it all started almost like 16 years ago when I was doing my industrial engineering. And as you know, industrial engineering is kind of a specialization where you try to learn about the manufacturing processes on one hand, and also you try to understand how to manage these processes, which is the second aspect of industrial engineering. And all these tools which you hear in the process excellence space or manufacturing process excellence space, to be more specific, like Six Sigma, process capability, value stream heat mapping, ANOVA, analysis of variance. All these tools then forms the statistical tool set in this specialization. And this is how the journey of an industrial engineering starts. And this is how the continuous improvement things also starts running inside your head. But of course, after engineering, obviously most of us join a manufacturing firm or kind of an automotive manufacturing firm. And in my case, it was no surprise as well. I also joined an automotive manufacturing firm. It was a Tata company. Tata is a big group, as you all know. And I started in manufacturing operation and quality department of the plant, which was a kind of icing on the cake, because whatever you have studied throughout your industrial engineering, you can directly apply to the real world. That was a great stuff to start with. And this is how my journey build up from there. And Tata has a very good BPM process, or a kind of a BPM framework, which they call it as TBM, Tata Business Excellence Model. Maybe we can touch upon it later on if we have time, or if we want to go into the detail of that. And then while working with this TBM Business Excellence Framework model, coupled with TPM, which was Toyota production system and total productive maintenance. So all these concepts combined, and I was able to, finally start my journey in the process world with the real-time problems. For example, if you see the lead time, right? Lead time is the biggest problem that manufacturing companies face, or you can call it a cycle time, right? And a simple example of cycle time I saw in the manufacturing firm or my first company was, there were big parts. The components were very big for the construction machinery cranes. And then the machining time was just 30 minutes. The time the time required to produce these parts, right? But the setup time, the time required to set up these big parts onto the fixture or onto the machine was almost 2 times of what it requires to do the machining of these parts. And the idea was to reduce the setup time. And then just a simple idea came to the team, why don't we buy another fixture? And while the machining is taking place, why cannot we set up another part parallelly so that once the machining is over, immediately, the another part is ready to be loaded on the machine. So these kind of stuff is very simple. These ideas are very simple, but the benefits are very huge, right? And after working in India, I had the privilege to work in Japan, because most of my career I have spent in Japan. And Japan, as you all know, is a homeland for Toyota production system, right? And all these concepts of just in time, Pokayoke, all these concepts were born in Japan, right? We can pick up some stories later on, maybe from Japan also. And that is how this journey became bigger. And I was deep inside the process excellence world. One thing I have noticed about Japanese firms, I worked for 3 OEMs in Japan and also visited more than 40, 50 manufacturing facility of suppliers. What I understood, for Japanese firms, business process excellence is as important as oxygen is for the humans. They just cannot ignore it. And that is the key aspect of Japanese manufacturing. And that is why when we talk about manufacturing, Japan, the name of Japan comes hand in hand, right? And moving on, I was in UK for an aerospace firm. It was a different business altogether. And of course, aerospace, automotive are two kind of business. And with aerospace, it did not take me a lot of time to understand that, aerospace is a different ball game. And the business process model, which I have learned over the years in automotive and the manufacturing companies, may not fit directly to the aerospace. Now, it's not one size fit all model. You should know what you are designing as a part of your business process model, because eventually it has to help your business. No? You cannot copy directly from outside without knowing whether it will fit to your business or not. And after that, currently I'm based in Singapore, as you mentioned, working with Schaeffler. I'm in a regional role. And, the continuous improvement, which I started almost 1.5 decades ago, it has taken a new shape now. And we are also using some kind of, we have just started using it, the robotic process automation to make our processes better, which was not the case when I started. That time the digitalization was not the main focus. But yeah, it's good to be here in Schaeffler, because we are one of the benchmark company which have a high focus on business process management. And this really, really motivates me to drive for further, improvements in my job, and also help my peers, helping bigger things. So this is how this journey built up from there till today, Daniel.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that background. That's really interesting. So obviously you're saying that Schaeffler is at the forefront of process management and how they manage their business operations. But why, what drives an organization to adopt a process-centric way of managing their business? Because there are plenty of organizations out there that don't and haven't, and I'm sure you've experienced that. What is that? What is that link between an organization not prioritizing it and then coming to something more like a Schaeffler, where or like you were saying about the Japanese automotive sort of manufacturers, where process is like oxygen to a human type thing. So why do some organizations get it and some organizations don't?
Right. So Daniel, I think what happens is, some organizations are very skeptical. And from the word go, they are very skeptical about the ROI. No? They are thinking always about the top line, how this business process management will help their top line. But essentially, when you start, you need to have conviction, and you need to know that it is actually going to help your business. Because BPM, we have so many use cases in the market, it is definitely going to help your business, right? So I think the skepticism is the one of the biggest factor that that doesn't allow organizations to think on those lines. And then when we have the organizations where which have taken a huge leap of faith in this BPM, are actually working on a Kaizen thinking. Kaizen, as you know, Kaizen means improvement thinking, right? I mean, for example, if you multiply 1 365 times, 1, it will remain 1, right? 1 multiplied 365 times. But if you multiply 1.01365 times, it becomes 37. Can you imagine a minute improvement in your process can lead to a 37x improvement by the end of the year? So that kind of thinking is missing. And so organizations who are not able to implement, they're just thinking about money from the word go. But that should not be the case, because the ROI, these things will definitely come, but it might take time. So first, the important factor here is you need to have the conviction to drive that.
And obviously, having that conviction, there are, depending on the organization, depending on the industry, there are a number of different, I guess, source points of that conviction. You know, if you were talking before about something to do with, I think you're talking about regulations or something, or complying to, I guess, changing regulations for a particular industry, or even adapting to the market. I know we were having a conversation before we jumped into this interview about customer expectations, and you know, our customers are interacting with many different businesses every single day. They're getting amazing experiences with some companies, and with other companies they're getting poor experiences, and they're noticing that, and that's why I guess that then motivates their future decisions, which companies they want to interact with more. And as working in organizations ourselves, we want our customers to want to interact with us. We want to provide a great experience for them so that they like to do business with us, or they have an enjoyable experience. So is it, how much of it is customer experience that drives process management, or is it more on the regulation side or compliance? Obviously, there are businesses out there where it's the work that they're doing is life and death. Like if you're sending an aeroplane into the sky with 300 people on it, you better make sure that you know your processes and the processes to build the aircraft, to maintain the aircraft, to send that aircraft into that sky, and to make sure that it lands safely. But what sort of what drives different organizations that you see?
Absolutely, Daniel. As you rightly pointed out, now the customer requirements is the biggest driver which drives this BPM, because it all starts with the customer, it ends at the customer, and BPM is between customer. So if we talk about BPM processes, it starts with the customer requirements, because the landscape is changing, our customer demands are changing, and business requirements are changing, right? What customer is not expecting you to do is just to provide an output for an input. But what mostly, concerned about is what is in between input and output, because eventually you can deliver an output for 30 days, 40 days, 50 days. But if you don't have a good business process excellence model, you cannot deliver for 2 years, 3 years, right? As required by the customer. And then it will cause huge supply chain issues for the customer, right? And when we talk about BPM, I mean, I've said customer is at the start and customer at the beginning, at the end, right? And then the BPM, we have the management processes on the top. So it has to start from the management processes, like the strategic planning, the budget planning process. And then we have the core processes comes, which actually provides the product to the customer, like production process, the supply chain process, and the delivery process. And then in the bottom, there has to be the support functions like HR, finance. So this is how the basic design of BPM should be. Start with the customer, end with the customer, driven from the CEO office from the top, and then the function supporting it in the bottom, and in the middle, the value is generated. That is what we call it as a product.
Yeah. Okay. And what are some of the biggest challenges an organization faces when they adopt this, I guess, process-centric way of managing their business? I know that it's not always driven from the top. There's a lot of organizations out there where I guess process-based initiatives are being started lower down without maybe the full support of senior leadership. But sometimes there's a disconnect between the strategic objectives of an organization and how do we make them happen? How do we make this blue sky, big picture, our big audacious goals happen? How is that actually outworked in the day-to-day working of the people that we employ? What are some of the biggest challenges when adopting this process management approach that you've noticed?
So the biggest challenge I have noticed is that once the business process approach is followed by any company, then we have to define the boundaries, because you cannot be a free-flowing animal anymore once the BPM is in place. And the human tendency all across the world is that they don't like boundaries, no? And that is the biggest challenge to kind of involve everybody in this journey, and then also make them understand that these boundaries are going to later help your internal customer and external customer. Like now we are talking about boundaries, right? A very interesting example came to my mind. I mean, I was in Japan for many years working in manufacturing shop floor, right? And Japan efficiency or Japan productivity is highest, as we all know, and they maintain a very high standard of this overall equipment efficiency, because at the end of the day, you have to meet your daily production targets, right? And then it is planned as per our production timing that you can only afford to have 2 tea breaks for the operators, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And that tea break also has to be just 10 minutes. So how they manage the boundaries now is very interesting. So the first tea break is at 10 to 10:10, which is 10 past 10, right? And then this is of about 10 minutes. And they know that strictly this 10 minutes break has to be managed. So the bell rings at 10 a.m. sharp and everybody stops working. People go for tea, smoking, whatever, right? Because it's a tea break, right? Now you have to make sure your work starts at 10 past 10. So what essentially they do, they ring another bell, and this time at 10:08 a.m., which is 2 minutes before the end time, so as to make sure that the production starts at 10:10. And this is how the Six Sigma processes or the excellent processes are created. So if you don't have these kind of controls, I mean, in Six Sigma also, you have to have the lower limit and the upper limit, right? And you want your process to move with that 99.5% confidence. It can only happen if you set up these stringent boundaries, because a minute in an automotive, you can lose almost 3,000 vehicles, because as you know, a car assembly, most of the car makers, an assembly of a car just take less than 1 minute. It's just 60 to 70 seconds, right? So these kind of boundaries people are scared of, and but you have to show the use cases to the people, right? And with these use cases, they will certainly feel encouraged, because it's for them and it's for the customer, and eventually it will lead to the profitability of the organization.
Right. And I'd imagine that, like, when painting that picture or painting that vision for the why do we do this? Why are we doing this work? What's the purpose behind it? You mentioned then the profitability of the company. Do you have some examples or stories of the value that's created by a process management approach? I think that's one thing that for a lot of the listeners that are yet to get buy-in or adoption from senior leadership, because you said before that they're wanting to know what's the return going to be, what's if we invest into this, what are we going to get out of this? There are many things that we could be investing our money into. Why BPM? That's one of the big questions, is like, well, what's the return? What's the value? And being able to share case studies or examples or stories of, well, this is how it's worked in this other company, or this is how it's worked in this business unit or this division of the organization. Maybe this could work elsewhere. That's very powerful in trying to get that buy-in and that sponsorship. So do you have a couple of stories or examples you can share with the audience where process management was put into practice in whatever way or shape or form that looks like, and it has delivered significant value to the company?
Certainly, Daniel, I have plenty of examples. And before I quote one example, I think what is more important here to understand also that what business process management is trying to do is it is bringing all the processes together under one umbrella, right? And if you don't have a BPM, we also need to understand every department would be kind of working in a silo, and the output of one department would not be linked to second department, and eventually we would not be having a complete value chain in a streamlined flow, right? And now let us come to an example how this business framework, business process excellence model brings all the processes together and how it eventually turns into profitability. Because we must understand the lead time of a service, lead time of doing things. Time is money, right? Essentially. For example, you are completing one task in 8 hours, and then another person is completing that task in 5 hours, right? He has 3 hours more. So even if both the persons are working in a week for 40 hours, I mean, they are actually, the work cannot be compared because one is certainly more efficient, other one is less, right? So let me pick up one example, and let me pick one example from the common life so that the layman can also relate to it. This was another example from Japan I saw. It was a sushi restaurant. As we all know, sushi is a very famous the food item in Japan, right? And what I saw, that restaurant is actually following the BPM model and also an ISO 9001 certified. And how that BPM helped them grow their business was quite interesting. Maybe let me share that anecdote with you. That restaurant used to be very famous, used to be very busy all the time. And it used to have a big queue in the waiting list almost all the 7 days of the week. And then before having this process excellence model, of course, you cannot expect that process excellence model to be kind of a very professional one. But what the owner has told me that previously there used to be a queue. The people used to wait outside the restaurant until there was a table inside the restaurant, and then they used to lose almost 50 to 60 people every day, which means that they are directly losing almost an opportunity to earn 3,000 euros more, right, in a day, or whatever you can call it. So then owner recognized that, and then one day he introduced a system. Very, very simple idea, not a very fancy thing, right? Because BPM is not about creating fancy ideas. It's about just bringing everything together and see how you can optimize and how you can, make your business run better. So one day he just put 2 iPads in the front of his restaurant before people can enter. And while other people was eating inside, the people who were waiting outside the restaurant, they were asked to order food before they can get seated, and people started ordering the food, and that the ordering time was reduced already before the people got the seat, right? And then when that person got the seat inside, the food was delivered in 5 minutes, and that ordering time was eventually eliminated altogether. And then they did not increase their capacity of seating because that the space was limited. They cannot buy another space. But by reducing the ordering time for each customer by 8 minutes, they could eventually have 28 customers more by end of the day. And you can imagine, in a single day, if you're earning maybe 2,000 euros more than your regular business, it's such a big amount, right? So a very simple example, a very simple idea, but you can see it directly affects your profitability, right? Because any business, the ultimate goal is to earn some bucks, right?
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. That's great. And I think something that a lot of organizations can learn from. I like what you're saying about BPM is about simplifying. It's about making things simple for both your employees and or your internal customers, if you wanted to call them that, and your external customers as well. It's about making the process simple and more enjoyable. Because the more complex it becomes, the harder it is to be profitable, and the harder it is to scale, and the harder it is to grow and to respond to service requirements and service issues and things like that. So I think simplifying is a huge key there. But when an organization, because there'll be people listening to this that they, that story would have given them a lot to think about. I'm sure, my own head was sort of ticking over different ways that, that is so true. How can I simplify operations in the current organization that I'm working in? And there are plenty of other organizations that I interact with. How can I support them on this journey as well? Getting buy-in from all of the different stakeholders. I know that we've touched on this, but you've obviously got senior leaders getting buy-in and sponsorship, but you also have the front end employees, the front end users, the process participants, the process performers, getting buy-in from all of these people, even if it's maybe a customer-facing process or a customer journey, getting buy-in from them if you're going to change the way that you do things. How do you get buy-in from such a wide range of stakeholders? Obviously, it's very specific to the processes that they're involved in, but and you want to eliminate as much resistance as possible. But how do you go about that?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, Daniel. Yeah, because the buying in is as difficult as, taking a buy-in is as difficult as, as the change management in the industry, because always the people in C-suite have their own thinking. They are always thinking sometimes more on the monetary terms. That's not the case with my current company though, but in my previous organizations, I've seen some of the C-suite people are, mostly looking forward on the top line growth, right? And if you don't present them the use case, if you don't show them the use case or benefit of doing that, they will say it's just a time waste, and they will ask you a question: why should I invest my resources? Should I invest my money when you don't know how much are you going to bring back to me? So those use cases have to be shown to the executive members, to the senior leadership team, to drive this BPM for the companies who are not doing it at the moment. And the second important thing is that use case has to be from your company. I mean, you cannot show an use case of a shoe manufacturing company while you are doing a business of furniture manufacturing, right? And so those use cases has to be relatable, either from your domain. Better is that use case has to be from your own company. That forms the strongest case, right? For example, we have not touched upon robotic process automation, for example, right? So, I mean, last year we had a problem in my current organization that we were unable to close the quotations on time, for example. So we had many quotations in the system. So we have RFQ, right? Customer request for quotation, and we give them a quotation, but every quotation is not converted into business, right? And then some of the quotations which could not get converted into business, that was still lying in the system from ages. And we have a very good system, SAP system. We have a good ERP system. We have fantastic systems. But in this case, nothing worked because quotations were lying there for years, and for months rather, not years. And then one day somebody recognized that there was an old quotation still open in the system from last 1 year, which should have been closed a long way. And then what we tried to do was we kind of set up a regular meeting. We said, okay, let's monitor it bi-weekly and try to close all these quotations manually, which are overdue, which are more than 60 days overdue in the system and which have expired, right? And then that was also not sustainable because it still needs human involvement. We still missed out a lot of quotations because of lack of time in checking that, downloading that list. That was very tedious. And one day we did a pilot of robotic process automation, and we somehow linked our robotic process automation with SAP. And the coding of this RPA, what we did was that within 60 days of expiry of this quotation, RPA, the robot has to run this program and has to automatically close the quotations. And once a month, the robots the robotic process automation runs with the system, and the quotations are automatically closed. And when we showed this use case of robotic process automation to our peers, to our counterparts in other regions, they immediately took this up, not only to solve the quotation problem, but they could see many similar problems which they were struggling to solve for many years. And but they were also struggling to show a use case of this. And the moment we showed this use case of robotic process automation, it became such a big hit. And people, our company counterparts from other regions also bought in. So this is how eventually you have to find a problem first, and then also kind of find a solution for that, and then use that use case to build up on that.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. It needs to start with the problem. You need to find a pain point that you're going to aim to fix that's measurable as well. You don't want to embark on an exercise for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months without any clear sort of why or purpose behind it. Otherwise, you'll get to the end of doing what you think is process management or process mapping or whatever it might be, and it's not actually delivering any value. Like the idea of documenting what's being done, that alone doesn't change anything. I mean, you could say that it gives you transparency, it gives you visibility. But if you don't make any changes with that transparency, if you don't make any changes to the way the organization is running, then it's just going to stay doing what you've always done and achieve the results that you've always achieved. And if you're looking for something different, then something needs to change. So, I think that's so important. You gave us the example of the sushi restaurant, the ISO 9001 sushi. Do you have any other examples or stories? Because I think that was absolutely fantastic, and sort of you painted a picture for us that was a very clear and concise way, and it showed the value that was delivered. Do you have any other examples you can share? Because I'd love to hear if you do.
I'm a big time foodie, and to make everybody understand, I always pick up some examples from my life outside office also. So another example is a very interesting example, but it's also about food, and it's a different example from what I've shared just now, and it is from Singapore basically, and it's just an example which happened to me. What happened to me? 3 months ago, I ordered a food via delivery app. Delivery app is very famous, not just in Singapore, but in every country, right? And that gentleman delivered the food to the wrong address. And after waiting for the food for 1 hour, a message popped up: your food has been delivered. I called their company, the delivery company. Where is my food? They said the food has been delivered. I said I have not received the food yet. And then, of course, the food was delivered to the wrong address. And then after, waiting for 90 minutes almost, I understood that this food is not going to come to me. But as a process guy, or as a quality or manufacturing guy, I always try to analyze the things, right? Try to find the root cause. And the root cause I found with this delivery app was the food delivery was made, and the final completion button of the delivery was in the hand of the driver, because he can press that button, food delivered. There was no verification from the customer side whether he has actually received the food or not. The push button was with the hand of the driver. This was the missing link, because just 6 months ago, I ordered one parcel from a very famous e-commerce company. And what they do is, when they deliver anything to you, the delivery boy has to ask you for an OTP. And that OTP is sent to your mailbox by that e-commerce company. And when the delivery boy comes, you give that OTP, and then only he can push that delivery completion button in his system, right? So now we have seen two different companies doing the same thing, but on one hand, the customer is super satisfied. On other hand, the customer is not even closer to satisfaction. He has not even got a single piece of meat out of his chicken bucket, right? So this is how a simple things can make your customer feel more satisfied, more valued, and then this is how actually you increase your customer base. I mean, now if you go back to your original thinking, why I need to implement the BPM, this is the reason, because you don't want to lose businesses, lose customers, and eventually close down, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's very important. I think in that example, it wasn't life or death, but there are many organisations where it is life or death, or it is much more serious than that. But even if that in that process, if that's not just a standalone sort of isolated case, if that's happening for every second or every third or every fourth delivery, you know that organisation isn't going to be around for long if that's the experience they're giving their customers, because you certainly aren't going to go back to them. You certainly won't want to go through that again. You want to go to an experience or have an experience that you're going to know and trust that it is going to happen the way that you expect it to happen.
Absolutely.
But when you look at the future of BPM, what does that look like? There are many things happening in the space. There are many technologies. There are people, some organizations are diving straight into RPA. Some organizations are diving straight into process mining. Other organizations aren't doing anything and they're still at square one. But when you look at the future and the trends that are happening, what do you think the next 2, 3, 5 years look like for the process space?
I think that digitalization has taken so much momentum in last 2 years thanks to COVID-19, and then I think this is going to stay, and this is going to become even bigger and bigger with the help of artificial intelligence, metaverse, and of course robotic process automation coming into picture, right? And then I think this will be the near future. I can already see, but this will still take some time, because there are some organizations who have not even thought how their BPM network should look like, how their BPM framework should look like, what are their key KPIs, what they have to measure, what their customer need for them, what are the customer pain points. So they have still not evaluated all those things. And unless and until they answer those questions, they cannot directly, ask a consulting company or a third-party company to please help us and implement the BPM framework. So the first step, the basis will always remain same, but the future is always going into this direction of digitalization, artificial intelligence, and robotic process automation.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. That's fantastic. And for those organizations that are yet to even build out their process architecture or even have an understanding of their core, their management, and their support processes, what do they need to focus on right now? Obviously, every organization is different and has different challenges and obstacles. But for an organization that maybe is a couple of thousand strong in terms of headcount, what should they be doing as a priority?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because certainly if there is an organization, there are many organizations who have not yet worked on this topic, as a first priority, they should certainly sit with their leadership team along with the people from the ground, because these kind of things you cannot just discuss in the C-suite room and come out with a solution. You need to involve everybody who are actually linked to the ground. They should sit down together, have a workshop, and try to understand what are their top pain points. And it works with 20-80 ratio, because as we all know, 20% of your concerns are actually harming you more than 80% of your problems, right? So the 20-80 ratio has to be figured out. Top 20 concerns have to be listed, and they should not think that they are late in this journey, because it's never too late to start, because it's better to start now than to vanish from the market forever, because we have seen the businesses getting vanished in last 2 years, and that is because they never had this framework to make them sustainable, and then the business model just died. So as a priority, they should sit down, start with this two things: what are their problems, and then how they can solve these problems. Come out with the problem list, come out with the basic architecture, and in case they don't have an expertise or they don't have a past experience in implement a proper framework, of course there are companies out there who can support them. And then it would also make sense for them to go to a third party company to seek their support to implement this. But if that base or the case is not clear enough, they would not even have confidence on the third party company also, why they are going to them for this. So this is how they should proceed, I believe.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. I think this conversation is going to help a lot of people that listen to the podcast. I know, I mean, I meet personally with many different organizations that are embarking on a process journey. And oftentimes the question is who's already doing this and who's already doing this well? Because you can learn everything you want in theory, but we want to learn from the people that are actually putting this into practice, because it isn't maybe as smooth sailing as the different books or the different sort of websites that we can access, which is all very valuable information. But it isn't going to be a straightforward journey if you're an organisation of a sort of a certain size. There's a lot of people to be involved, a lot of people to bring on this journey, and unless everyone's unless everyone has automatically had the same light bulb moment where they're like, this is what we need to do, then there is going to be a bit of a change that needs to happen there. But I've certainly learned a lot from you, Aayush, in this conversation, and I know the audience will have as well. So I just want to thank you for sitting down with us and sharing your knowledge with us today. Is there obviously we're only able to touch on so few topics in the time that we did have. How does the audience connect with you moving forward? They may have other questions burning on their mind that they want to ask you. How can they sort of follow up this conversation and connect with you?
So firstly, Daniel, thank you very much for having me here. I mean, it was truly a pleasure to have this conversation with you today. And then on your second question, they can connect with me on my LinkedIn. I mean, I'm available on LinkedIn, and I'm very open to have the people connecting and discussing with me. It also keeps my brain running, so they can definitely connect with me on LinkedIn.
Fantastic. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Aayush. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's a great pleasure. Thanks, Daniel. Bye.